too old. He's too big.
She said he was innocent. She even created a website for him, which, womp womp, she hasn't updated in 6 years, so maybe she got the picture. She's also got quite the imagination, because this is like, really fucking weird. The police searched his home and jewelry from his victims, along with traces of blood.
Well,
this wasn't enough.
Main way is saying killers, serial killers, people who kill people for no reason, but are just people who kill people for no reason or for a reason that that they got caught for. So today we're going to be watching Baislin and Serial, 2 active killers in Phoenix. Right, active? You mean like they still there? I have family there. Wait a minute. So this is going to be a reaction video, so let's go, everybody.
Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike. Still. And in this whole video, we're talking about Phoenix. Now, I hear you barking, big dog. Which one? This one? This one?
Oh, I'm so scared.
I wish. Nope. This one, with the buildings and so on and so forth. You know yourself. Desert or whatever. During the summer, Phoenix can get hotter than any other city in America. But in 2005, 2006, the city of Phoenix, Arizona was chillingly haunted. It was a scary time to be living there. Someone was stalking the streets up to no good, particularly around a street called Baseline Road. This saga, I guess, if you want to call it that, took place over about a year, and in that time, there wasn't just one monster on the loose, there were 2. Let's give it a go. It all started in the summer of 2005. That summer was long and it was hot. It was a hottie. There had been some strange signs going on for months. Rumors, gunshots heard, police reports filed, and some shooting deaths. Maybe the hot Arizona sun was scrambling people's brains. Folk were just fed up. Or maybe something new had arrived, and it was when George Thompson's body was found that the police knew there was something more going on than they had, originally suspected. Georgia was an exotic dancer. On September 9th, 2005, her body was found in the car park of her apartment building. She had been shot in the head. Her pants had been unbuttoned, but she hadn't been assaulted. And at the scene, the police found a bullet casing. Now, in the preceding months, there have been some random shootings. What started out with dogs and cats and even horses, like what, quickly spread to humans. The homeless mainly, the so-called less dead. And in addition to this, a number of sexual assaults had been reported. 1 month before George's body was found in August 2005, there had been a number of sexual assaults near the Baseline Road in South Phoenix. At one point, 2 teenagers were sexually assaulted at the same time. And the number of attacks in Phoenix would increase exponentially over the coming months. 4 more in September alone, 3 more in November, a mix of robberies, sexual assaults, and a random murder on the streets of Phoenix. For example, a man named Nathaniel Schaffner was shot walking his dog. He was shot trying to protect his dog from being shot by... Sometimes the attacks occurred within minutes of each other, a shot being held up at gunpoint before the perpetrator ran out of the store and dragged a passing woman into his car to be assaulted. It was like this series of attacks just came out of nowhere. And in December, guess what? Didn't get better, shockingly. On December 12th, Tina Washington was shot in the head as she walked home from a preschool where she worked. That same day, a man named Jose Ortiz was shot and killed walking the streets. Before 2006 rang in, there would be another robbery, another shooting, another murder in the streets of Phoenix. It was then that the police began to theorize that there wasn't just one person behind all of this, there was two. There must be two separate bad boys stalking the streets. See, in some instances, people were just walking down the street, minding their own business, when a car drove by and shots came from. Witnesses who survived the shooting said it was just a light blue 4-door car that was just driving by and just unloaded on them for no reason whatsoever. In the other cases, a number of sexual assaults were linked, by where they were along Baseline Road. There was, of course, other murders, but they hadn't been linked yet. In February 2006, 2 more bodies were found, those of Romelia Vargas and Myrna Palma Roman. They were killed inside a food stall they both worked at, and both had been shot in the head. The next month, Chao Chu and Liliana Cabrera were abducted from behind a restaurant they worked at. Both were later found shot to death. Now, you might be a little confused at this point, who's who, what's what, and well, you weren't the only one. The city was confused by these startling random attacks that came without any warning. There seemed to be links, but they were thin at this point. But more than confused, understandably, people were scared. A dark cloud was hanging over the city. The killings seemed to be intensifying. The killers were brazen, not just going after lone, less dead, but sometimes abducting 2 people at a time. Whoever the people were behind this, they weren't afraid of going after groups in broad daylight. The police knew there was 2 serial killers. I mean, at least 2, because they were working overtime. One killer was shooting from cars, right, doing drive-bys on just random pedestrians. The other assaulting women and then shooting them in the head if they resisted. It continued.
I think the black guy was doing
after
the
restaurant
drive-by.
employees were taken, a sex worker was found stuffed between a building and a shed. She'd been there for a while. A month later, a woman was abducted by a man wearing a Halloween mask.
That's crazy. People like Phoenix have. I mean, like even now, it's like saying where I'm coming from. It's like crime has went down there, but it's like some people that just out there just killing people, just be killing people, and like that is and if they were scared of 2 of them back then, like imagine what they will be now.
The next day, another drive-by shooting, and 20-year-old Claudia Gutierrez Cruz was murdered. The police at this point came up with, nicknames for the serial killers. Because, I mean, come on, if you don't have a nickname, are you a real serial killer? Are you, though? The drive-by sniper was named the serial shooter. They didn't know the car maker model, but witnesses said it was a light-colored sedan. The other killer was called the Baseline Rapist, due to the early attacks being located along
Baseline,
or
I said it
near
wrong.
Baseline Road. The murders were eventually connected to the sexual assaults, so the Baseline Rapist became the Baseline Killer, and a sketch was circulated of this person. Now at this point, May 2006, they had 18 separate crimes linked to whoever this monster was. That number would later rise substantially when they would start to review past cases. But in the meantime, the baseline killer would have one more victim. On June 29th, 2006, at about 9:30, the baseline killer struck for the last time. This time it would be captured on CCTV and shake Phoenix to its core. Being pretty dramatic now, but I think this warrants it. A woman named Carmen Miranda was cleaning her car at a car wash and on the phone to her fella. As she was speaking to him, she told him a panhandler was approaching. She then screamed and the phone went dead. Hours later, her body was found in a building next door, her pants unbuttoned, and she was shot in the head. Everywhere, people were watching their back, you know what I mean? You would never know when these people would strike, when these killers would strike. You would watch every car as it passed by. You don't know which car bullets could ring out from. The baseline had started, well, on a near baseline road, but now it had spread across the city. Both killers were not limited by geography. 2 task forces were created to stop them. The serial shooter case had 375 people working on it. The baseline, 100. After what happened to Carmen Miranda, the baseline killer went underground. The serial shooter, though, seeing his time to shine, you know, gonna steal the spotlight now, is ramped up. 8 more people were shot in July 2006, with the final murder taking place on July
2006.
30th. A young woman, Robin Blasnik, was shot and killed while walking down the street, talking on the phone. By that time, you know, late summer 2006, the baseline killer had murdered 8 women and 1 man and assaulted at least 33 women. The serial shooter killed at least 8 people and wounded 18 more. Talk about the, year of fear. And they had no suspects, no real leads, no nothing. Which is, kind of shitty. But there was something, and a reward of $100,000, for information might loosen some lips and sink the serial shooter's ship. In a bar called the Stardust Tavern, a man named Ron Horton had been told some things by a friend who was a bit goosed. The drunk friend was named Sam Dietman, and he told Ron he was involved in the shootings. When the serial shooter's last victim, Robin Blasnik, was, Ron, who had been told this stuff by Sam earlier, felt like he could have prevented her death. And so he called the police. $100,000 reward? First I heard of it. I didn't even realize. Ron gave the police Sam's number. They traced it and also surveilled a man Sam used to live with, one Jeff Hausner. Tailing them both, they happened to see Sam getting into a light-colored sedan. Maybe the one the survivors said bullets came from. And then tracing the plates of that light-colored sedan, it led them to one Dale Hausner, which is Jeff's brother.
It's a white guy doing drive-bys.
And so, it turned out that Dale Hausner and Sam Dietman, they were the serial shooter. They worked together. One drove, one shot. The police tailed them even as they drove the streets of Phoenix looking for victims. They would slow down when they passed pedestrians, as if sizing them up before pulling off. After being granted wiretaps and bugging their apartment, they heard them talking and laughing about the killings. It was on August 3rd they were both arrested. Dale Hausner never admitted anything, of course he didn't. Even though it seemed like he was the brains, or, rather lack of brains, behind the operation.
Actually had trouble most of our, except for alcohol, a little drugs and all that. I haven't been trouble with the water, but that would just be so, a kick in the ass to me, a spit in the face. That's more would use my gun and my car and go out and hurt people like that. I'm just saying, but if you kill everybody people you kill, the serial killer, the other guy who's going around shooting people.
What do you know about that particular case?
35 people shot, animals, horses, dogs, 5, 6 people dead. I'm not even shooting, but we talk about it shouldn't be this hard. I mean, maybe it is this hard to catch people, but
Maybe the person's just really good. I mean,
it could be a law enforcement officer, it could be Sam, it could be anybody. The person's gotta be smart, you know, because they get like this for a long time.
Sam Demon, he told the police about the whole shebang.
do you have any idea why you're here?
Yeah, it would be the serial shooter case.
Guys just down see somebody and turn around and come back and get them. Also, lean back for a second. Okay. Now this. Right. Okay. And then he continues on the way. And what does Dale do after he fires? He kind of chuckles a little bit. And has a gun down beside his leg there. Looked at me for a second. Kept driving. Is it fair to say that Dale was more interested in the
This dude was snitching,
notoriety of this,
but lying at the same
Is that
time.
fair to say?
Yeah, fair to say.
Did you have to go to one of those understand that they said anything specifically to you about being responsible for the death of another human being?
Well, Jeff is, but that's with him. I don't know what to believe.
Okay.
They shot, robbed, set buildings on fire, slashed tires, all while smoking meth, and then they escalated to random drive-by shootings. It was all game to them, a real-life video game. They just wanted to wreck shit.
Pretty much.
Dale
They
worked
need
as
to
a
be
janitor at the airport, and in his free time he was a freelance photographer who also worked in the boxing scene in Phoenix. He even managed to get a pic with Mike Tyson. He was a bit of a ladies' man, surprisingly. Even tried to use them as alibis for when the shootings occurred. That would fall to shite. He had suffered tragedy, though. In 1994, he was married with 2 kids in Texas, and while the family were driving, his wife fell asleep at the wheel and they went into a river. Both his children drowned.
Oh my God.
Sam, he was, nothing really, a petty criminal, fuck all to his name. He had been an electrician, but due to drugs he couldn't really hold down much, and he had a long history. After the arrests on August 3rd, when the police were searching their apartment, they found a little scrapbook, detailing their adventures so they could look back in future years with pride. I guess, what else you can do with them? So they found in this scrapbook, it was Dale's, about the serial shooter. And they also had articles about the baseline killer in the scrapbook as well. It was like they're having a little friendly competition, the scallywags. And speaking of the baseline killer, now by the time the serial shooters were arrested, he hadn't struck in about 2 months. But now the baseline killer had gaps similar to that before. So the police, kind of knew it was only a matter of time before he struck again, before another body turned up. Plus, with what he was doing, he's not going to stop. They got in a forensic psychologist to diagnose this guy and help create a profile. His modus operandi, look at me using the big words, it started in August. It started out with, assaults, kidnapping, before he escalated to murder. If they didn't comply with, what he wanted them to do, he would shoot them in the head. Nearly all the victims were shot in the head. If they did comply, he would do what he wanted to do, but he would never, complete. So they didn't really have much DNA, but they did have some DNA from saliva. Also, the thing is, the women he killed, none of them had been assaulted, but they'd been posed like they had been, like he would pull their pants down, essentially, but he didn't actually assault them. It was like he was, it was like his own mental trophy, his calling card. They had a few suspects as to who the baseline, was. In fact, they had a guy in jail, in prison, who confessed to some of the murder, one of the murders anyway, which was just a false confession, wasted police time. So, one suspect they did have, though, who was actually quite low down on the list, was a fella named Mark Gudo. He lived with his wife near where some of the attacks had occurred, and he had a history. As a teenager, he'd been accused of sexual assault, but no charges were filed. And in 1989, he went to prison for sexually assaulting a woman and chasing witnesses with a shotgun. Also that same year, he robbed a store at gunpoint, and for all this, he got 21 years. In prison, he got married to Wendy Carr, and he was out after 13 years in 2004. The next year, the baseline killer emerged. Mark lived a quiet life. He worked in construction, would buy lunch for the guys at work, and was a well-liked, charming guy, which the police discovered when they put him under surveillance. They finally had a break in the case when DNA came back from 2 of the teenagers who had been assaulted in 2005. Well, there was saliva, and it was Mark's.
We're here today to hopefully bring a little bit more relief to this community.
He was arrested on the 6th of September 2006, his 42nd birthday. Now, at this point, he was only charged with the attack on the 2 teens, because they didn't have more to charge him with, but they wanted to obviously keep him in while they got it. They would! And it would surprise everybody who knew Mark. Though maybe not people who knew his record. Neighbors would say he was a sweet guy. His wife went to bat for him.
He's the baseline killer. He's a convicted felon. He's a serial killer. Who's the Markado you know?
He's the baseline killer scapegoat. He is the person that was just black enough to be arrested. He's too old. He's too big.
She said he was innocent. She even created a website for him, which, womp womp, she hasn't updated in 6 years, so maybe she got the picture. She's also got quite the imagination, because this is like, really fucking weird. The police searched his phone and jewelry from his victims, along with traces of blood.
Well,
this wasn't enough to outright call him the baseline killer,
because he's black, isn't it?
How about it? Right about when they were able to attribute the murder of Sophia Nunez to Mark. She wasn't thought of as a baseline killer when she died, but she was linked by witnesses and DNA after his initial arrest. Mark Goudeau was then charged with 74 crimes, not counting, his initial arrest for the teenager attack. He pled not guilty. Mark would have 2 trials. The first was for the attack on the 2 teens. In December 2007, he was found guilty of that attack, and he got what did he get here? Interesting. 438 years. He still had another trial to go through with 74 charges there. That would go ahead 4 years later, but in the meantime, these serial shooter trials happened.
These are the 2 monsters we've been hunting. 2 years ago, he was named one of the 2 men who had the Phoenix area on edge for months. Dale Hosner is accused of leading the notorious serial shooter attacks. Police say he fatally shot 8 people and attacked 20 others between 2005 and 2006.
There were no similarities amongst the victims. The best we can tell, they were just random victims, and these individuals just picked folks out, and that was it.
And now at the opening of his murder trial, prosecutors are calling him a narcissist. They say he kept newspaper clippings of the shootings and enjoyed the effect on city residents. The 35-year-old pleaded not guilty to the 87 criminal counts he's charged with.
I'm just guilty by association, even though I did not shoot anybody or kill anybody.
It's the first day of what's expected to be a 9-month trial. Osner and his roommate, Samuel Diekman, were arrested in August of 2006 in their apartment.
Sam Diekman pled guilty to everything and got life without parole. Dale pled not guilty and was convicted of 80 of the 87 charges laid against him. He tried to kill himself before the state could, but he failed at that. Jeff Hausner, Dale's brother, was also charged with participating in some of these serial shooters' shooting. He got a few decades for that.
Could you please tell me your full name, Mr. Hausner?
Dale Sean Hausner.
Your date of birth?
February 4th, 1973.
The jury having returned verdicts on counts 5, 15, 20, 22, 37, and 86, it is the judgment of the court as to count 15 that you be sentenced to death. It is the judgment of the court as to count 15 that you be sentenced to death. It is the judgment of the court as to count 20 that you be sentenced to death. It is the judgment of the court as to count 22 that you be sentenced to death. And as to count 37, it is the judgment of the court that you be sentenced to death. And count 86, it is the judgment of the court that you be sentenced to death. Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Annie, you want to take the jury back and
Dale Hausner was sentenced to death. 6 times, actually, he was sentenced to death. You know, just in case he survives the first 5. Mark Goudreau's trial for, what was it again? Oh yeah, 74 crimes went ahead in 2011.
Our cameras were not allowed in the courtroom today. With a team of prosecutors on one side and Mark Goudreau and his defense team on the other side of the courtroom, 130 potential jurors walked in. Goudreau is accused of being the baseline killer, tied to 74 felonies, including 9 murders and 15 counts of sexual assault. He says police have the wrong man. The jury will ultimately decide. But before that jury is chosen, they must go through these 36 pages. It's the state of Arizona versus Mark Goudreau jury questionnaire with 152 questions. Some are pretty basic, such as, have you heard or seen anything regarding this case? And do you know anyone who had any involvement in this case? It also asks about the media coverage of the baseline killer case, how long they've lived in Maricopa County, and if they have any opinions about this investigation. Then other questions, such as, have you ever read about molecular biology? Would you describe yourself as a leader or follower? Have you ever heard or seen anything about DNA or DNA analysis? Attorneys for both sides will now go through the answers and determine who they want to keep for the trial.
They had his DNA, trophies from victims, they had Tina Washington's ring found in his home, a bullet found at her scene was the same as bullets found at all the others, and he was found guilty of 67 of those crimes, including 9 murders.
For about an hour and a half, prosecutors detailed all 9 murders, explaining to jurors why he should face the ultimate sentence for his crimes.
He enjoyed the power and dominion he exercised over these victims.
As prosecutors explained the aggravating circumstances, such as using a weapon, a victim under the age of 15, and the fact he was on parole at the time of the killings, they described him as cold.
He enjoyed the threats of force, the threats of death, either to the victim or a victim's loved one that he inflicted.
As the prosecution seeks the death penalty, prosecutors repeatedly told the jury that each of the acts Goudreau committed were especially cruel, calculated, forcing his victims to comply or be killed, and ultimately killed, whether they complied or not.
The defendant was very well aware of what he was forcing each of these victims to endure.
Goudreau's defense team in this phase spoke only 3 minutes before handing it back to the jury. And Mark Goudreau's wife, Wendy, sent me a text saying, quote, "It's hard for me to know how Mark was convicted on no or questionable evidence. I don't understand why his attorneys didn't put on a defense. This continues to be a huge miscarriage of justice."
Simply here to tell you, Mark Goudreau is no wolf in sheep clothing. Heard that so many times, I don't know what to say. As you all know, we can't talk about crimes that I have, what you guys found me guilty of. But I could look at each and every one of you in your eyes today and tell you, Mark Goudreau is no wolf in sheep clothing. I'm not trying to blame any one of you. The decision you've come to or made. But I do pray that one day you guys learn the truth about this case, or the case that I've been accused of. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Goudreau.
You're a monster.
There's no wolf in sheep clothing.
You are.
They done that. They assassinated my character. They painted me to be this monster. I'm no monster.
And I simply ask the judge for permission to let you know that Mark Godot is no monster. I am no monster.
You are a monster.
Just ask whatever's in your heart. I ask you, please. Make it your choice.
He asked the jury not to kill him. They weren't having it, and killed him 9 times.
That the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant should be sentenced to death. We find that the defendant...
For 10 months, you acted as a terrorist in our community.
I'm an innocent man. I did not commit these crimes. I had nothing to do with these crimes.
First, Mark Godot was sentenced to 438 years for raping 2 sisters, then sentenced to death for murdering 9 people, and now a sentence of 1,200 years. Yes, 1,200 for the rapes and robberies tied to the baseline killer dating back to 2005.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm very angry here.
My goal is not to make a parody today, but simply to impose the sentence you deserve for each of your sneak attacks on folks.
In an exclusive interview with me, Godot's wife, Wendy Carr, said police have the wrong man. In court, she told the judge he was framed.
Surely the real suspect would not or could not appear normally day to day and be able to maintain a job and a marriage.
They found the scapegoat in my neighborhood, and they planted evidence on me.
In 2013, Dale Hausner was found dead in his cell. He overdosed on antidepressants. Sam and Jeff are still in prison serving their sentences, as is Mark, who still denies being the baseline killer to this day.
They needed someone. They needed someone. The perfect person living in the neighborhood. Oh, he's black. Oh, he's ex-con. We use him. Ain't nobody gonna believe him because he's an ex-con. Anything I wanted. House, 2 new cars. Beautiful wife. The hell don't be out there raping and robbing people for $30, $40 for. I mean, what can I say? I didn't do nothing.
He appealed. His sentences were reaffirmed in 2016. And that, my friends, is the stories of the baseline killer and the serial shooter, and how for 1 year the city of Phoenix was on edge, being prowled, being a hunting ground for 2 serial killers. Something else, the stuff nightmares are made from. In the end, though, thankfully they were all caught, and Phoenix has been safe ever since.
But in recent days, there have been 4 murders.
There's a serial killer in Phoenix.
An Arizona man is in custody for a string of killings that terrorize the Phoenix area.
Well, that's for another video.
Man, that's crazy. That is wild. I always wonder, like, what make people kill people? Like, just, well, I don't know, because it could be a number of things that people kill people for, or like a reason. But I just anger, or sometimes people just kill people because they just not, mentally themselves at that time. So it's just wild that people straight kill people, and then some people just kill people for no reason at all. Like, they just drive down the street and just shoot you because you're just there. And that's terrible, and that's frightening. So be safe out there, everybody. Be safe. Be safe. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Please let me know what you thought about this video in the comments, and then also like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers by August. If you can help me out with that, we greatly appreciate it. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and I will see you next time.
Previously on Ready to Die.